If there's no free will, how can we choose to stop identifying with our thoughts or feelings? I will give this one a go. I think it's best to clearly distinguish two levels that we're talking about when we discuss free will and we're trying to wrap our heads around how we can not have free will but still live in a world where we're supposed to take action, which is seemingly contradictory. The fact that there's no free will has implications for us and how we think about things, but really has nothing to do with us. It's more a statement about the way reality is, or the way things are. When I look out in front of me and there's this whole visual landscape, everything is just occurring spontaneously. And I have no confusion that there's any meaningful way my actions can impact what occurs in front of me. Because clearly if I sit here and I try to use my will to move something in my visual landscape or to alter my visual landscape in any way, there's no meaningful action that I can do which actually changes anything in the way that I want it to. Everything just keeps on occurring free of me, free of my will. And that's just true. That's just a fact about the way things are. And I have no confusion about it. The same is also true for the thoughts in my head and the actions I make in my life. The only thing is, I'm identified as the enactor of my actions or the thinker of my thoughts. So I feel like there's something meaningful that I'm doing, which is resulting in those shifts and changes. And it is true that it feels like that. It certainly feels like that, and it feels like that for most people. We assume that that feeling is there. That's how we're taught to think about our lives. So if someone asks us if we have free will, we just assume that we do. To be honest, we haven't even really probably examined that sensation that much. We're just assuming this is the way things work. So when someone checks with us, we go, yeah, I mean, I enact things. That's how it works, right? But if we examine that and we get closer to that sensation, we can realize that we're actually just confused about being the thinker of our thoughts or the enactor of our actions too. In reality, that sensation dissolves. It's actually not there. We feel like it's there, but if we look closer, it's clear that even our thoughts and actions are just occurring spontaneously. And this can simply be the way things are. It's possible to be confused about the way things are, only to one point later in life realize that we were wrong the entire time. An example of this is like perhaps your whole life you've been calling, this is a real version, but I had a friend who had been calling margarine butter their entire life. And so they went through their entire life calling margarine butter and butter butter, and it wasn't until at some get-together someone pointed out that they had two different names. Now, regardless of what that person thought, there's an external reality to them where they were just confused about the nature of margarine their entire life up until that point. That's just something that can happen, and that's how most of us are with our relationship to free will. There's a social context or conditions that make us think that we have this sense, then we assume that we feel that way. But if we break it down logically, free will just can't even make sense with the way reality is. And also we can experience the fact that there's no free will. Now, that being said, it still becomes very relevant and useful, considering the way we usually conceptualize the world, to speak as though free will exists, perhaps as a more genuine or ultimate description. We hope, given what we know now, we hope the conditions arise spontaneously for people to stop identifying with their thoughts or feelings. But we can also guess, given the way things are, if people come to a misunderstanding on free will and think that everything is just happening randomly and there's no point to continue behaving in the ways we do, and we just stop acting, that's very much a condition in which people probably won't stop identifying with their thoughts or feelings. there's still certain conditions which we hope, in our more accurate description, will occur to result in the consequences those actions or behaviours normally result in, which are in line with how we envision we want the world to be. Having these conversations are important in a more accurate description because we want knowledge and information to spread. This is a spontaneous moment. I don't actually have any free will right now, but the moment I'm confused, I'm convinced that I have free will, I think what I'm talking about is important, and that seemingly motivates me to communicate these ideas. And if we want to use the concept of I chose to do this, well, then that's probably beneficial, especially if removing that concept was a condition in which I wouldn't be inspired to do this important action of communicating and sharing these ideas. But that distinguishment still exists. Ultimately, in reality, everything's just spontaneously occurring. Free will doesn't actually map on there or make sense. But apparently, we still hypothetically predict how we want the future to be. We still have this sense of volition ourselves, and it's still apparently useful for us to communicate as though free will does exist. And so one apparent condition which is happening right now is that we communicate as though free will is true, and that enables us to behave in certain ways. Perhaps a little bit in the future, more people will come round to this idea and it won't be so confronting, the idea that there's no free will. And then maybe we'll feel less kind of confused and attached about the idea of us actioning. There's implications in realizing that there's no free will. It's harder to take things personally, and it aligns us to behaving much more rationally. Everything's just working out conditions that we want to occur in order to result in particular consequences or particular results. But the idea that there isn't free will and the fact that we still seem to choose to behave in certain ways, those two ideas aren't actually contradictory. There isn't free will, but one of the conditions we want to occur is people seemingly making choices to improve their lives. That's how we would describe this way of things occurring spontaneously. We want heaps of spontaneous occurrences of people deciding to make their lives better or engage and examine and transform the world towards these goals that we have. There's never been free will, but your whole life you've felt like you've made choices. And we're just confused about the nature of the way things actually were. But nevertheless, that was a useful way of framing things and a useful way of communicating. It's a tricky idea, and a lot of people get confused about it, and a lot of people find it quite challenging to, comprehend and settle with. But I do believe it's actually only a positive idea, which makes us work clearer and much more rationally and effectively, therefore, towards the things that we want. A better world for ourselves and a better world for others. It transforms us to living in a world where we just look at conditions. What are the conditions which need to occur, and the behaviours or actions to create those conditions that result in that desired result. So ultimately, it's not up to us to stop identifying as a thinker of our thoughts or the feeler of our feelings. But given the implications that result or that spontaneous occurrence would have for our well-being, hopefully it keeps on happening. I hope maybe something I said here brings us closer to what I think is an essential insight to be woven into the fabrics of society eventually. Perhaps the best conditions is that it comes along a little later on when we're more in a place to accept it. Fantastic question about specificity. I love it. Thank you. Have a lovely day.
If Sonam has helped you, please consider supporting for the benefit of others. Establishing a base engagement is the biggest hurdle for new ideas.